Assalamu alaikum. Today we are going to not start with, but continue with stylistics examples and hopefully finish it today. And maybe in our next class, we'll continue with narratology. So far, in terms of stylistic examples, we have seen how certain technical aspects of language, like under lexicalization or transitivity, or cohesion, or collocation, or cliches, seem to work to bring in a certain new interpretations, new understanding of literary texts, right? And for example, we have considered The Sound and the Fury of William Faulkner, and Capital by Auden, and a few other writings, or even Jane Austen's work to some extent, right? So yes, this we finished, and we saw some common collocative phrases. Apart from that, yes, we also saw a little bit about diegesis and mimesis, wherein we basically looked into the main difference between these two, considering any narrative, whether it be, a play or a fiction. I hope I don't need to repeat it, and you must be able to remember them all. So I'll just move on to foregrounding. See, foregrounding is another textual feature. Okay, it's another linguistic feature that brings in or emphasizes certain parts of the narrative text, not merely narrative text or any kind of text. So what happens is, probably through repetition or through deviating it from common lexical patterns, the writers wish to bring in a special focus to a certain idea being presented in the text. Please bear in mind, there are times when a word is twisted, right? Word is twisted, or certain unusual suffixes or prefixes are added, so that the word is made to stand out a little from the ordinary sense. Ordinary sense is in, like, say for instance, mm, let me think. I couldn't think of a better word, so I'm just reminded of certain charms or certain curses that are used in Harry Potter. Remember those curses: stupefy, obliviate, or what's the other one? Impervious, right? These words are common adjectives, right? Common adjectives that are modified slightly, that have undergone minor modifications at the hands of J.K. Rowling to present in a completely, or to make it stand out. So when Hermione uses words like, stupefy, it actually probably comes from stupefaction, right? Stupefaction, or making someone stupid. Making someone stupid as in unable to think for a moment, right? So a certain foregrounding is done, certain emphasis is laid down on certain words to create stylistic effect, right? Of course, in when you ask the writer, him or herself, they would tell you that no, there was no such intent at all. It just naturally must have come to them. But from a stylistician perspective, because the stylistician actually observes or looks for things that make the work stand out somehow, right? Make the work beautiful, aesthetically pleasing, or artistically effective, right? So from a stylistician perspective, they would point out these kind of words that actually are foregrounded through certain specific emphasis, through repetition, or through probably special referencing, or by certain deviations, lexical deviation. Okay, please bear all these three in mind. Okay, so when we speak of foregrounding is nothing but an emphasis on textual feature, may be achieved through unusual or strange collocations. So we've already seen what collocations are. Collocations are set of words, choice of words that seem to occur on a habitual basis. Okay, and collocation, meaningful repetitions, right, achieved through unusual or strange collocations, meaningful repetitions, contrasts, and deliberate deviations. So it could be any of these is in, see, it could be from emphasis on textual feature may be achieved through unusual, strange collocations. Unusual, please bear this in mind. Unusual and strange collocations. Unusual or strange collocations, meaningful repetitions, contrasts, deliberate deviations from the normal norms, rules, and conventions. So here's a definition for you. In literature, foregrounding may be most readily identified with linguistic deviation. Okay, foregrounding is identified by linguistic deviation, the violation of rules and conventions by which a poet transcends the normal communicative resources of the language and awakens the reader by freeing him from the grooves of cliche expression to a new perceptivity. So, see, in my last class, we spoke about how the terms like malicious village, or waiting expensively, these collocative patterns are broken down to achieve a certain, perceptivity in the reader of an unusual instance, right? To bring in a greater freedom is achieved by breaking these cliched collocations, right? So, a stylistician would observe these, use these concepts to analyze how certain effects are created. Okay, effects are created in the text. Now, speaking of, wait a minute. We were talking about mimesis yesterday. This is where we stopped. So, already we have spoken about how diegesis would indicate telling, while mimesis relates to showing, right? So here, this example, I believe we stopped here, as in where I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil, my lust shall be satisfied upon them, I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. All of these contribute to a mimetic part, as in where we actually see the enemy talking about how he intends to overpower, or to completely overtake everything he comes across. One sec. So moving on to the next slide. Yes, reference and representation. We were talking about foregrounding, right? So after foregrounding, and foregrounding is achieved through reference and representation as well. So this is one of the two of another set of stylistic concepts that actually make things stand out a little bit. Or like for instance, we were talking about pronominalization. Remember, pronominalization is where a cohesion is achieved by referencing, right? Where is that? One sec, let me just look for it. Yeah, here it is. This is Mandy. Mandy is my friend. Mandy and I go to picture together. See, a certain awkwardness is set here for the lack of pronouns, right? So there is a kind of disruption. There is a sort of start-stop quality to these lines, right? So which can be remedied, which can be removed by the addition of proper pronouns, appropriate pronouns in their places. So when we speak of referencing, it acts very much in that sense. It acts in terms of not merely as pronominalization, but in many different ways. So here, referencing is the indexical function of language, pointing to different aspects of reality, how it seems to point out to different kinds of realities, whereas representation is manipulating language to stand for an experience or situation, right? So here, where is it? I'm sorry, I seem to have lost it once again. Yeah. While referencing is the indexical function. Indexical function as in that which acts as an index. Index is like the front page, right? The content page where you are directed to each and everything that is inside a book, right? So it acts as a referencing, whereas representation is manipulating language to stand for an experience or an entirely different experience or a different situation that you represent, that is represented through language. That's what representation does, right? One sec. Okay. Now there are speech presentations. We've just used two examples here of speech presentation: direct speech, indirect speech. So there are categories of speech presentation. Example, he said, "I'll come back to see you again tomorrow." He said, within quotes, "I'll come back to see you again tomorrow." Okay, direct speech presentation. In the indirect speech presentation, you'd have, "He said he would return there to see her again the following day." All right. See, it is indirect speech. Direct speech, indirect. Again, this is something that you must have already worked out in your school days, working out your grammar text, right? Now, free direct speech is the direct speech form without the quotation marks, though not always, and or the reporting clause. The reporting clause, what is the reporting clause here? He said he would, right? Reporting clause. The combinations may differ. Effect, the narrator withdraws as intermediary. So all along in your grammar classes, you must have understood the difference between direct speech and indirect speech. But here, what we are doing is we are actually using this concept, this understanding of how this direct speech is creating a certain effect in the text. So because of the indirect speech, we find the narrator, in the direct speech, the narrator is moving away. Okay, there is a movement of diegetic concept away, and it becomes more mimetic to you. All right. So see, okay, I keep using that particular aspect. See, this is a new recorder that I have installed in my phone since yesterday, and I'm sort of confused as to how to make use of it. So see, in the direct speech, there is an absence of narrator, right? There is no reporting clause here, whereas in the indirect speech, it is reported to you. So this is more diegetic, and this is more mimetic. This is mime to you. This is presented to you directly. This is indirectly told to you. Okay, you get my point. What kind of effect is created here? It's as if like the narrator is speaking to you. Here it seems like you are watching it firsthand. Okay, you are seeing it firsthand happen in front of you, right? Especially even if you remove this as well, what would happen is it would be completely as if you are watching a play. That is, it will be entirely purely mimetic. See, it is mainly about the effect. There is grammar, there is plenty of use of grammar, the grammatical structures and all. The stylistician will only point out the features, okay, how the features seem to work in order to bring in a certain effect. Okay. Now, continuing, he said he'll come back to see you again tomorrow. I'll come back here to see you again tomorrow. Without the quotes, I'll come back here and I'll see you again tomorrow. So consider the syntactic deviation. Syntactic deviation is in how certain deviation, a certain effect is created by deviating from the normal syntax. Okay, so normal syntactic patterns. The poet disregards the rules of sentence. Fasten me flesh. Fasten me flesh. Can you? Does this make for any anything that you can actually understand from a syntactic perspective? Is the word order subject verb object or something? Fastened me flesh. Fastened would be verb, me subject, or is it an object? It could be either of this. Flesh, VSO, right? A grief ago. A grief ago. A while ago, you must have heard of a while ago, an age ago. But here, there is a deviation in the syntax formation here, isn't a grief ago. The achieve of, the achieve of, the mastery of things. Can't seem to work it out. See, the poet disregards the rules of sentences. Fasten me flesh, grief ago, the achieve of, the master of, the achieve of. Again, it's not merely, it's not really something, the kind of structure that you often see or understand, right? There are two types of grammatical deviations. There are morphological and syntactic deviations. See how the normal syntactic structures are deviated. So we were talking about morphological and syntactic deviations. I'm sorry, I had to, you know, I was interrupted a little bit. So yeah. So morphological and syntactic deviations. And so morphological would indicate how certain each word seems to function. So you must have studied about free morpheme, bound morpheme, lexical, functional, and all of those morphological structures, right? So how a certain prefixes and suffixes or even infixes seem to change the way a certain word works, right? For instance, if you're talking about terror, right? Merely the addition of ify, terrify. I'm getting a call here. All right, so I'm sorry, I had another interruption in between. So we'll just continue with this. So when we speak of morphological, so again, syntactic deviations in terms of how certain verb phrases and noun phrases need to come in a certain order, habitually. I mean, we're talking about habitual orders, right? So those word orders, those syntactic orders or morphological orders are, deliberately flounced. Those rules are deliberately flounced so as to create a certain effect, right? Or like ordinarily when you see ripped jeans, what's the concept of ripped jeans? What's the concept of crushed silk, right? I mean, normally speaking, as a norm, you have to wear something, you feel like you need to wear something that is ironed out, all the creases ironed out of the clothes, and that is like tailored really well, and no stitches to be visible, right? No stitches are to be visible on the outside of your dress, right? On the exterior part of your dress, exterior surface of your dress, right? But when you fashion tries to sort of you know sort of compete against, or sort of challenges these norms, right? So the writers tend to break certain rules. So for ripped jeans is an action against jeans that are really of fine quality without a single tear in them. Again, crushed silk is something, an action against a violation of the rule wherein you don't have any creases in your clothes. You deliberately crease the cloth so as to make it look fashionable, right? You tend to stand out. You tend to express your probably your individuality by showing that you are flouncing certain rules. So see, the writers tend to achieve a certain effect, bring in a certain effect in their works by breaking rules of morphology and syntax. All right. Now, speaking of foregrounding, again, the notion of foregrounding, a term borrowed from the Prague School of Linguistics. We've already spoken about Prague School of Linguistics earlier, how they were formed of the Russian, Russian school of criticism, right? Russian formalist school of criticism, right? So this idea is borrowed from the Prague School of Linguistics. It refers to the range of stylistic effects that occur in literature, whether at the phonetic level, as in alliteration, rhyme, or the grammatical level, as in inversion, ellipsis, or the semantic level, metaphor, irony. So it could be at the phonetic level, at the grammatic level, the semantic level, right? It could be any of it. Phonetic level, basically that which it makes you, that which appeals to your hearing sense, right? How it seems to affect your speech pattern. All right, the grammatical level, how a certain inversion or certain ellipsis or certain other forms of grammatical structures tend to bring in a certain effect. Or semantic level, again metaphor, irony, you're all familiar with all of those figures of speeches, right? How a certain meaning is created by, by bringing in paradox or irony, metaphor, metonymies, all of those things. One sec. There's some problem with this. Yeah. Now consider this. In Zinadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree. I mean, I keep going back to Kubla Khan quite a bit, mainly because, see, it is something you're all familiar with, and I'm sure you would understand. It could have been in Kubla Khan, like, one sec. In Zenadu did Kubla Khan. It could have been like in Kubla Khan decreed a pleasure dome in Zenadu, a stately pleasure dome to be built in Zenadu. Thus, the normal state of normal, you could say that it's the uh, a normal syntactical structure, right? You could say, you could call it normal syntactical structure in terms of like in something like this. Kubla Khan decreed a stately pleasure dome. That is 1, 2, 3. Kubla Khan decreed a stately pleasure dome to be built in Xanadu. That would be a normal syntactical pattern. Now, this is an inversion of the pattern to create a certain effect. What effect is created? In Xanadu, all of a sudden you're told that there is a mystical place called Xanadu, because this is not something you usually hear, you often hear, right? The idea itself, this oriental word is itself is creating a certain image in your mind. In Xanadu, did Kubla Khan decree? Did Kubla Khan, someone with an exotic name, Kubla Khan, a stately pleasure dome decree. You know, this is a very fine example of inversion. With it comes the very stately effect, a sort of royal effect. Okay, royal effect of having, a sort of mystical effect is created. And as far as the semantic level is concerned, you're all familiar with metaphor and irony. We often talk about it. So, foregrounding can also be achieved by repetition. Blow, blow, thou winter wind. Like, in my earlier classes, I must have already spoken about bubble, bubble, boil and bubble. Bubble, bubble, boil and bubble. Of course, there is a certain amount of alliteration here, but also it is mainly repetition that creates its honorific effect, right? By parallelism, foregrounding can also be achieved by creating certain parallels. Some features, usually structures, are constant, but he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities, right? Like, sorry, once again, he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. Both, he was wounded, he was bruised, both are parallels, intending to bring in a certain effect. Now, stylisticians look into the schemes and tropes, and generally they are sort of used interchangeably, but a minor difference is evident here in terms of how schemes are more superficial and tropes are more meaningful. And schemes are the language play devices that relate to sounds and spellings, whereas tropes are the language play devices that relate to meanings. Okay, these are more superficial and this is more meaningful. Schemes are superficial, tropes are meaningful. This relies on sounds and spellings. This relates to mainly meanings. Assonance, alliteration, cacography, I rhyme, slant rhyme, all of these are examples of schemes. Cacophony, double entendre, euphony, hyperbole, irony, metaphor, metonymy, sound and visual imagery, and understatements are examples of tropes. That is basically they come from within. Tropes are, intrinsic parts of the text, whereas schemes or what is visible part of the text, or the sensual part of it, they are more sensuous. It's kind of like, the sensuous apprehension. It's what the writers call it, the critics call it, right? Then, so lexical deviation in stylistics, lexical deviations refers to a new word or expression. See, we spoke about syntactic deviation, morphological deviations, right? Lexical deviation as in how certain new words are created from the old word, okay, to form a particular, a specific meaning or specific effect, particular effect. In stylistics, lexical deviation refers to a new word or expression or a new meaning for an old word used on only particular occasion. Sometimes a writer intends to reach certain kind of rhetorical effect, so he will invent some new words based on the rules of word formation, but these new words are seldom or hardly used on other occasions. That means in literature, some invented new words are only used by the inventor himself. Surely these nonce formations is in words invented for special purpose, bring about a certain stylistic effect and greatly improve the power of newness and expression of the language. All right. I just wanted you to see a few of the examples of nonce words. Look at this: the widow making unchilding, unfathering deeps. The widow making unchilding, unfathering deeps. And look at this: and storms beguile his fame. See, unchilding is a word not often heard, right? It's sort of like one occasion word. Unfathering, again something that you're not we aren't really familiar with, or is not in common parlance, right? Now, beguile. Beguile is something that you are familiar with all the time, but still the usage here, you know, and storms beguile his fame. And then the storms are spelling out his fame, or like trumpeting out, the fame of this person to everyone. You see, the usage, even though it's an old word, a word that is common is often in use in common parlance, it still is something that is used differently. Okay, there is a deviation here, hence it would come under nonce words as well. Okay, whereas these words like unfathering and unchilding is something not really, we are not really familiar with, is not something in common parlance, but still is quite effective here to create quite effective in bringing in some this aesthetic quality. Let him easier in us, again a nonce word here. See, let him easier in us. It's not something, not an expression we are familiar with. One sec. Now also consider this this deviation in terms of register, as in, see how register as in like from that is not non-poetic, poetic register is different from non-poetic register, right? How one borrows from the other. The nymphs are departed, right? The nymphs are departed, have left no addresses. A more subtle example is the following two lines from Auden's letter to Lord Byron. And many a bandit, not so gently born, kills vermin every winter with the corn. See? And many a bandit, not so gently born, kills vermin every winter with the corn. See? Okay, fine. see, please look into all of it and try to try to figure out certain more ways how certain deviations in text in terms of syntax or morphology or grammar, simple plain and simple grammar, or you know phonology, all of it seem to contribute to the bringing in the uh, aesthetic effect in literature. Okay, how certain effects are created in literature. That's the job of a stylistician, and put yourself in that place and try to figure them out for yourself. Okay, this is all for now. Thank you so much for your very patient listening, and I also apologize for the many interruptions that seem to be unavoidable during my classes. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything. Stay safe, be happy. Assalamu alaikum.